Welcome, Andrew. Why don't you start off by telling everyone a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Thank you. So yes, I'm Andrew Long, as Adam's introduced. I've been in the sector now since 1996. I originally started as, I guess, best expression would be an estate agent for care homes, valuation work, consultancy work. That led me into a breadth of work across the private sector, dealing with individual care homes, corporate care homes, sales of Helen McCardle Care in 2005, Bond Care in 2008. I helped to externalise Essex County Council care homes, and we sold out the Regency Care Group, which was part of Northern Rock when Northern Rock demutualized and became listed on the stock exchange. So I'd seen a lot of different businesses. I had the great privilege and the pleasure of becoming with the LNT group, working with Lawrence Tomlinson. He'd been a client initially and then transitioned client size when he invested into the GLP business that I was running. And that then brought me into the exposure of developing purpose-built care homes. And there was no doubt in my mind that one of the big things that I've learned is that to be able to start off with a clean sheet, with a clean piece of land, and build from scratch has a huge advantage. I'm not necessarily suggesting that the ambience of an older building that's terrifically well done, such as Audley Court and perhaps what Hallmark have done, is not good, but the advantage of being able to organise the space, the internal arrangements, the lines of sight, the lighting, the furniture, and in the recent years, sort of 2015-16, when I helped to develop the Oakdale Care Group, things like sprinkler systems, big difference. We were well at that long before this tragedy at Grenville. And we've helped to be able to develop, lots of other features of the care homes, which have enabled a great quality of life for residents. So that's one part of the learning. I think the other part is around what it is that residents like. And whilst in the background, one has to have a pretty vigorous governance process and good management systems, residents really want to be able to enjoy themselves. But in order for that to happen, the rigor and discipline of your governance process and your management process has to be in place. It can't be too loose. And that's something that I continue to learn, in fairness, through my partners in Danforth. We've formed and been able to really get to what I think today is a very vigorous offering in terms of new business. So being quite seasoned in the sector and having been involved since the mid-90s, as I said before, I often look at it, if I was putting my advisory head on, I'd be looking at it now and thinking, well, who are the new operators that are coming into the marketplace and what is it that they can do? And I think that the new operators are really beginning to get to grips with what quality care actually looks like. And the touchy-feely side of it and what translates into a great experience for a resident can only happen if the quality systems and standards and procedures and policies are in place behind that help it. And so what I've learned is that that's very, very important, but you have to also be able to translate it in an understandable and easily digestible basis for the staff. So if anything to go by, I would say that my kind of interpersonal skills have helped me to do that bit. But they would, I would say, be the two biggest things that I've learned in forming the Adore Care Group.
Yeah, and in terms of let's take two of that. Well, you're focusing here on two of the quality systems and your teams and your staff. So, tell me if you can on the quality systems, for example, and the governance, what you learned, who you learned from in particular. So, knowing that, yeah, when I'm starting a door, I'm going to get this like right from the very, very beginning.
Yes, yeah. So I think, well, I've had the huge benefit of working alongside a gentleman called Mark Reeves, who is pretty much the head of adult social care for Kirklees Council many years ago,
Yeah.
worked through us in Ideal Care Homes in LNT Group, and then went on to be the head of adult care for Anchor. Mark's very systematic in his approach,
Hmm.
extremely strong on his governance. And I think what I have learned from him is the importance of just settling things in a calm way and being able to do a good stand back from any particular situation to enable that to be resolved to a satisfactory point.
Hmm.
And the routine that comes with doing that by having in place a governance map, a governance pathway in the systems of such as cool care, enable that to be able to come to life in a meaningful way for not just me as an owner, but also stakeholders and the rest of the board to be able to get good visibility of what goes on in the business.
I see. Right, right. So so that's like, tell me if I'm understanding this correctly, that's that it being written down, being very, very clear. Is that what you're referring to here?
Yes, very,
Yeah.
very much so, and also being able to input systems that are helpful to the staff and are ultimately for the benefit of the residents. So if I was winding the clock back to when I sat as the nominated individual to Ideal Care Homes, one
Hmm.
of the things that I did observe was there was an awful lot of paperwork, an awful lot of filing, a lot of staff having to write things down and spend time in manual process. So I was very keen to explore and be able to bring in to new businesses the electronic care planning systems. And so we embarked on PCS as one of the very early
Right.
providers at the tail end of Ideal and just going into Oakdale. And that, to my mind, helped enormously with the ability for staff to make contemporaneous care notes as they go, to be able to interact with residents in a meaningful way and sometimes involve them in making those care notes, but not have all the clutter and paraphernalia of files all over the place and pieces of paper and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that was a fairly important learning point. Added to which, like many providers, we've brought in electronic medication management systems and so forth, and that just helps to kind of steady the ship and give a very focused sort of care planning and care delivery.
Yeah, I see. And then the second point, which is around translating this to your staff, to your teams, which of course most important asset you have is your teams and how they support and care for residents. So, tell me a little bit more about this translation then of quality governance to your teams and your staff.
Well, I think that's largely about routine. That's about embedding a routine in place that allows staff to have the framework there that doesn't mean that each day they're coming into work, it's all a little bit loose and quite not knowing what they're doing. That there is a structure that, providing they adhere to that, very quickly determines what the requirements of the day are, the
Mm,
requirements of the week, and the monthly governance process that emanates from that. Once that structure is in place, staff are often happy about what they're doing because they know that there's the safety of a system and a process behind them. And to some extent, it's about being able to describe that, show that to the staff, show how it works, that enables them to feel comfortable with doing it, that it's not just about process for process's sake, but it
mm.
keeps them safe, it keeps them focused, keeps them on track, and provides them with the time and space then to be able to deliver good quality care.
I see. Very interesting. And tell me, Andrew, in terms of who, what groups or individuals kind of really brought this home to you, set you know that was a mentor, if you like, or was really made it clear to you about the importance of that.
Yes, well, so to mark through the ideal care homes
Right.
and
Yeah.
seeing that
Mm.
business for sure.
Mm.
Um, Mike Whitehead, who's the chief executive of Danforth Care, is very much a systems driven
Right.
person. And I would
Yeah.
say, as an observation to the sector, Mike represents to my mind the next wave of high quality operators. You know, he's a youngish man, and I think he's bringing a completely fresh approach
Mm.
to how the delivery of care can be evidenced through high quality governance process that allows everybody to be very settled and very safe about how that's being done. So yeah, I've seen I've seen people develop really nice assets in the past, wonderful environment, but not necessarily being able to deploy the care service in a rigorous way. And equally as well, I've seen other people being able to do very high quality process management in inferior assets. And I think today it's about bringing the two together and developing them in tandem with the operating process. And that is probably the biggest element of learning going forward. I think probably for most care providers, to be fair.
Yeah, and just a particular question on your teams and your staff about the structures. So very systems and processes, so people know what they need to be doing, and it's kind of clear. How does that encourage? I'm not sure innovation is quite the right word, but going out on a limb in terms of doing, your own particular approach or style or onto something, onto the culture of care and indeed
Yeah.
management of an organization of a care
Yeah.
home.
So I think if I looked at historically looked at care providers that I've seen in the past and advised upon, it wouldn't be untypical for a
Mm,
single care home. The typical model might be a manager, deputy manager, a raft of seniors, care
mm,
assistants behind that. In our care homes, and we've had this for quite some time in both the Adore, Danforth, and in Ideal prior to that, we've had and got a general manager, care manager, two deputy managers working back to back, then you raft of seniors and care
mm,
assistants, so forth behind it. The care manager was an interesting role for me because I was perhaps instrumental in conceiving of that role to an extent. I often envisaged the person that would be in the smock coat of the clipboard, checking how care was being done,
right.
ensuring that the tasks were being adhered to, that some resident of the day was being properly managed and processed, but that person of themselves would not necessarily be directly involved in delivering care. And to a large extent, that is the care manager's role in our businesses. It's a straddle between deputy manager and general manager, can be called assistant general manager for want of a better expression. But that's been an integral component in the staffing structure that's then allowed the twin deputy structure underneath that. So whilst it might convey a little bit of being slightly top heavy, that approach gives extra resource, timing, direction to the care teams on the floors in the care homes and allows them to be able to get on and do the work that's required to do.
I see.
That team,
Yeah.
that upper team also in creating just a little bit more time to be thoughtful about what's required, do the stand back from any particular care issues, but also look at what else can be done. So harnessing that with our kind of all-inclusive approach, it means that you're constantly thinking of, well, how do we get the best and do the best for our residents? How do we
Mm.
nurture them in a way that truly delivers the quality of care?
Yeah, and that actually fact, but you mentioned there the all-inclusivity element. Just leads on to something I quite like just to talk about, because we were talking about before we started recording today about the all-inclusive fees versus menus, top-ups and additional costs and fees for additional services for a residents and their family. So tell me a little bit more about that, what you decided to do and the pros and cons you feel of the particular two ways of thinking about it, and why you decided to take the approach that you decided to take, which is the all-inclusive approach.
Yeah. So the turning point for that had been sort of back in 2016 when forming the Oakdale Care Group, which again is a similar kind of iteration and development to Adore Care, out of LNT Group. I'd spoken to the accounts department in Ideal, who was saying, asking them the question around, what do you typically charge as billable extras? Anywhere from 30 quid to 350 quid. And typically there could be a bill for £2,500 or £3,000 or £4,000 or whatever, followed by another bill for a few quid or a couple of hundred quid. And sometimes there would be a bit of resentment staff around that. I'd also gone through that process of seeing other care homes with local authority fees and top-ups, different fee levels, different fees for different rooms, and felt that there was a definite simplicity about just having one fee and being able to do everything within it. I wasn't the originator of that by any means. Seamus Holton, I think, at Barclay Care Group would probably be credited with that in the early days. But he was doing it from very high premium assets in the Cotswolds, Buckingham and so forth. But I felt that there was the opportunity for us to do that, in our first care home in Oakdale in Sutton Ashfield, and to just basically say, let's stick 50 quid on top of everybody's bill and do everything for them. And that allowed us to be able to have a stronger financial base with which to be able to do all the quality measures that we wanted to do and the activities and entertainment, etc. And that's very much become the backbone of how we present our proposition to client, and by client I mean relative, resident, and in some cases the local authority, because it's important to have that conversation occasionally with local authority where we say, look, this is our proposition. We have one single fee point. So it's not a case that local authority will pay so much and we will just agree a top up with the family and then have a two-tier kind of civilization within our care. We want there to be no discrimination between any particular part of the group, that everybody feels equal, and therefore it's a very consistent way of doing it. It also allows the staff group to buy into the business model. So you could go into either of the Adore care homes, or for that matter, probably any of the Danforth care homes, ask a member of staff what the fees are and what's included, and they'll be able to tell you.
Yeah, I see. Very interesting.
Very transparent.
Yeah, that's great. So, the quality systems, the staff, the teams, and the culture, I guess, is something that we've been referencing here. But I was interested in particular on this, on the pricing and how you came to decide on your all-inclusive elements. Is there anything else, Andrew, in particular that you feel that I can imagine someone who's thinking about starting up? You started up relatively recently, kind of on your own, 2022, which is it's now 2024. So do the maths, that's like 2 years ago. So for those who might be thinking of starting themselves, anything else that you've really felt that you've learned that was something that you would want to really convey?
I think it's important to find out as much about the sector as one possibly can. So unless somebody's involved in the sector presently, they need to understand about it, but not necessarily be put off by the noise of care in crisis and social care civil assisted to the NHS, or problems with the CQC, etc. Because at the end of the day, the sector, and I think this is something that not only I've learned, but I think many of us have learned, probably including yourself, Adam, but the sector takes care of itself in some respects. We're entrepreneurial enough in our thinking to be able to get around some of the obstacles and ensure that we're able to generate the businesses in the right direction. My sort of best mentor, Lawrence Tomlinson in LNT Group, has been a perfect example of that, in always being able to see the solution rather than necessarily just accepting the problem. And I think that a lot of providers can be like that, and are like that. So if
Okay.
you're coming into it for the first time, I'd seek out as much advice as possible. To talk to the likes of the LNT group as a case in point. Look at LNT Care Developments. If somebody was looking to invest into a new business, there are ways that can be done.
That's fabulous. And lastly, Andrew, if anyone would like to get in touch with you, maybe to pick your brains, if you were happy to share anything, how can they best contact you?
I think best contact me on my mobile number, 07802 454 275, or they can find me at adorecarehomes.co.uk.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much for
You're
being a
welcome.
guest on the Care CEO Success Stories podcast.
Lovely.